Hello again, welcome back to War Mysteries, and this week I'm joined once again by my brother Matt. I'm Jay.
Hello.
Between 1933 and 1945, the Nazis looted and stole more than $1.8 billion worth, contemporarily, of gold, jewels and cash, coins, jewellery and possessions. The vast majority of this was never recovered. So in modern terms, adjusted for inflation, the total amount that plundered, they reckon it's around about $26 billion worth. So in this episode, we're looking at the legacy of the Nazi gold.
We've got anything in there to splash out? We've usually got a picture.
The Nazi gold.
It's a nice one this week. It's colour. I suppose that is, it's not colourful.
That's just bad printing. So, Nazi gold. There's big numbers in this episode, real big numbers. An exact figure is actually impossible to calculate since records are incomplete or missing. Austria, the Netherlands, Poland, Czechoslovakia, Hungary and Belgium are widely thought to have been the worst hit nations, which is pretty obvious because they surround Germany. A prime example of the extent of this looting is the Hungarian gold train.
I've heard about it.
See, everyone's heard of the Nazi gold train. But
That's
this
what I've heard
one's-
about. I'm just assuming it's the same thing.
It's not. The Hungarian gold train is a train that was sent from Budapest in late 1944, loaded with a lot of gold. Gold, yeah. The Hungarian gold train is where we start.
Don't do the same thing as I do on the table.
It's fine. Still working out the relationship here. He was adopted. In March of 1944, Hitler approved Operation Margaret, which called for the invasion of Hungary, the annexation of its industrial centres and its industry, as well as the absorption of all Hungarian armed forces into the German military.
It's a weird name.
Yeah,
Well, it is.
With Margaret.
It's a strange name to call an operation.
Why?
Because it just is.
They come out with all kinds of weird ones.
But is that in? It's not in a foreign language, is it? I mean, is it?
Well, translated from German, yeah, it's, I guess, Operation Margaret. It can't be too obvious, can it? They can't go, oh, Operation Let's Rob Hungary of everything they own.
Operation Leave Hungary hungry.
Having appointed several envoys in Hungary beforehand, the SS were in a position to immediately seize power by installing these collaborators into key positions in the Hungarian government and eliminating all political opposition. So, by that, they mean kill them off, basically. So, there's a huge backstory to this involving the SS and collaborators within Hungary, ready and waiting in position as they invaded.
Mm-hmm.
Over the months of April to August 1944, factories and industrial assets were steadily dismantled and transferred to the control of the Third Reich, with much of it focused on armament, vehicles, and military equipment. Essentially, they stole, or looted, or transported all of their assets, militarily speaking. So factories, industrial equipment, tank production. They basically absorbed their military forces to help with the war effort. Hungarian SS henchman Erped Toldi, who had consolidated his position by surrounding himself with loyalists and armed militia beforehand, began to implement a vicious campaign against the native Jewish population in country, particularly focusing on the Jewish community within the capital, Budapest, which is where it was based, Budapest.
And they did not like the Jews.
No, this is a particularly focused account against the Jews. Obviously, over the course of the war, a lot of different ethnic groups and undesirables, as they called them, were targeted, but this was specifically against Jewish people. He knew the Nazis were going to come and invade. He knew they were going to invade. So he had foresight, foreknowledge.
How did he know?
He was in cahoots with the High Command, and he was a sympathiser, and he was recruited into the SS. So they had him ready and waiting in position. He worked, with others in power, to systematically strip the Jews of their property and assets, most notably with the November 4th, 1944 passing of a law that forced all Jews to surrender goods, assets and personal valuables, with the exception of 2 weeks' worth of food, light and consumables, plus a small amount of cash.
That's how you get people in it with a law. That's how you get them.
Well, this wasn't a particularly good law.
The 5p bag tax. Pretty sure that's law.
The 5p bag tax.
Paying 5p for a bag.
It's a bit different though, isn't it?
Very different.
They said basically, give us all your stuff. It's now illegal to own property beyond 2 weeks' worth of possessions.
I didn't say it was a good law.
70,000 of these Jews would eventually be deported to Auschwitz, and many of them would also be put to work on Project Riser. On October 5th, with word of the approaching Soviet Red Army to the southeast, Toldy ordered his men to evacuate a large quantity of valuables, gold and jewellery, to Obanya Castle near Lokut, further to the west. So closer to Germany.
Is it in Germany?
No. Lokut is extreme western Hungary, I think. Very close to the Austrian border. Or not very close, but close to the Austrian border. So way over to the west. The exact content and value of this shipment are not known, but similar caches of stolen Jewish property and valuables are known to have been hidden across western Hungary over the following 2 months. By early December, the Red Army was poised to attack Budapest, and at this point a train of 42 carriages was prepared. 42 carriages. So you can get an idea in your head of the extent of what they were stealing here, because it was fully laden when it left. There were people on board, to be fair.
Obviously.
Again, the value and quantity of what was loaded onto this train is not known, but according to a recovered cache linked with Toldy, who accompanied the train, it unquestionably contained gold bullion, gold jewellery, brooches, earrings, platinum and gold bracelets, brilliants, gems and gold clips, gold pins, banknotes of various currencies, wedding bands and spectacles. Spectacles back in the day were a very valuable item to own.
Particularly if you were old and like cricket.
130 passengers were on board the train at departure, mainly officials and their families, SS members and Nazi sympathisers looking to escape to the Reich.
To the Reich.
Yeah, well, they wanted to get out. They knew what was coming. The Soviet Red Army was about to attack the city, and
you want to be there when that's happening.
Let's face it, they're not surviving that.
Soviet Red Army have a like an infinite spawn, don't they? Almost. Just keep coming and coming and coming.
Kind of.
Stalingrad.
It is assumed by historians, and to a certain extent confirmed by period documents in the possession of collaborators known to have been on the train at the time, that the entire Hungarian National Bank gold reserve was also on board, amounting to 633 cases of gold bullion, worth $32 million in 1945.
It's just cheeky, isn't it, when people steal it, all of it, when they take it all.
Just emptied the
They just take the whole lot. It's terrible, isn't it? On the way out, they probably took more. They probably took everything in the bank. Went in, deconstructed all of the panel area, the lovely wood panelling where customers get served. Just everything. Take everything. All the pens on the holders with the chains.
Don't think they had
completely empty the building.
Probably went in there with screwdrivers, didn't they? It'd be a bit cheeky though if they left just a few notes on the floor. 20 quid. Have a beer. Yeah, so 633 cases of gold bullion worth $32 million in 1945. About $450 million today. It is taking the piss a bit, isn't it? The train departed Budapest at some point between the 16th and the 20th of December, making its way west towards Austria. Along the way, the train is known to have made several stops to collect cached stolen loot, including near Zurich, where 2 trucks and a number of motor vehicles were requisitioned by Toldy. Having broken into a nearby military depot, these trucks and vehicles then visited the Obanya Castle cellars. The convoy would certainly have accompanied the train for most, but not all of its journey. Now, there is a bit of controversy about what actually happened to those trucks in particular. The cars stayed with the convoy for most of the journey. The trucks disappeared in southern Austria.
It can't be easy to steal an entire train cart full of gold. I mean, where's it going to go? The track goes in two directions.
Well,
it seems very odd, all this.
Well,
You're saying that it went missing?
Yeah, the gold, not all of the gold, the bullion that came from the National Gold Reserve, most of that I think was recovered, depending on who you believe.
Okay.
But a lot of it disappeared. But there's a lot of contention over where these two trucks went to, because they weren't ever located, and it's known that they were with the convoy. By March 30th, 1945, the train had passed through Sopron, Brenberg-Banya, and was headed for Hallein near the Austrian border. Military trains transporting German soldiers that were retreating from the Soviet advance had priority on the railways at this point, and Toldy was careful to proceed inconspicuously and with caution, especially given the threat of partisans and soldiers out for personal gain, for whom a train laden with gold would be a huge target. That'd be a big target for me. If I was a German soldier at the end of the war thinking, you know what, sod this, I might just go and steal some gold and live by a lake.
Why have you underlined?
They're spelling. It doesn't recognise them as words.
Oh, brilliant.
It's Hungarian. Couldn't do anything about it. Because remember, this is the end of 1944, and the Russians' front is advancing, but obviously the US and the French are attacking from France and Belgium. Mm-hmm. So they're having to redeploy soldiers away from the Soviet front because they're retreating now. Obviously they've been defeated at Stalingrad and they're being pushed back. That's what's going on. At some point along the journey, Toldy transferred a large quantity of gold bars from the train to the lorries, without informing most of the personnel accompanying the convoy. The reason for doing this seems clear. Toldy and his men expected that they could retrieve this at a later date, should the train be compromised.
Fair enough.
Makes sense. Steal a bit of gold, hide it, don't tell anybody else.
Fair enough. That's where I went then.
Some of it. Yeah.
Some of it. Alright.
Not all of it, but enough.
That much.
Well, a lot. I mean, you imagine what one gold bar is worth then. Obviously, gold has increased in value now, but even back then, a bar of pure gold, we're talking $9.99 gold here.
An ingot.
Yes, an ingot. Yeah. Imagine what that'd be worth.
Imagine what it'd weigh. I'm not sure. I don't think that picture's going to tell us either.
Probably not. It's a bit pixelated. Shit. Ultimately, the train was compromised. In May of 1945, the train was discovered and captured by the Allies approaching from the west near Werfen. Very little of the loot on the train would actually be returned to the Hungarians, however. The majority of the train's contents would be ending up in military warehouses in Salzburg. Approximately 200 works of art that were on board the train inexplicably ended up in the hands of the Austrian government and have not been seen since. And they were supposed to have been returned to Hungary because they were known to be Hungarian cultural objects. And they were registered in galleries before the war, but they just never made their way back.
Shit happens.
The Hungarian government estimates that the total value of the goods, gold and loot that was on board this train was close to $350 million contemporarily, or adjusted for inflation, almost $4 billion, and is considered by many historians to be an almost total loss for Hungary. $4 billion today. Stolen.
It's a lot.
So, a lot of wonga.
I think I just swallowed a spider.
That's a large chunk of the total. So,
well, it isn't it really? Stole all their gold.
They generally got shat on from a height. It does get a bit better for them though. The next case study we're going to look at is the Merkers mine discovery. On April 4th, 1945, the US Third Army had cut across towards the Soviet zone, north of Frankfurt, a few kilometres inside the border of Thuringia. 2 US soldiers enforcing a nighttime curfew encountered 2 French women on a road outside of Merkers, who were looking for aid since one of them was pregnant. Upon escorting the women to a US aid station, they passed by the entrance to the Kaiserode potassium mine. One of the women remarked that the mine was being used by the Germans as a depository for stolen gold.
Grass.
Out at night, having a walk, pregnant, war going on around her.
Where did the pregnant bit come from?
She was pregnant. That's why she was out at night with a friend. There was a curfew. Obviously, the town has been occupied. US forces are enforcing a curfew. And these women were out, so they were stopped. And then while they were being escorted to an aid station, I presume because she was in the late stages of pregnancy. And she says, "Oh, you know, by the way, lads, sorry to interrupt you, but there's loads of gold in that mine." Upon blasting through a wall in the mine, a cave was discovered to have contained the following: 3,682 bags of Reichsmarks.
Nowhere to spend them though. Country's wrecked.
80 bags of foreign currency.
More chance of being able to spend that.
Yeah, bags. We're talking big sacks here. Huge sacks full of cash. 1 large bag of platinum bars.
Ooh.
63 bags of various silver.
Some of it might be electroplated.
8 bags of gold rings and wedding bands. That was pretty harsh.
That's harsh, yeah. Just to steal that, something that's that sentimental to somebody. But then I suppose, you know, you think, well, stealing it off 1 or 2 people is terrible. Stealing it off hundreds of thousands is even worse. You do end up with a lot of gold.
Yeah, but imagine how many wedding rings and engagement rings you'd have to steal to fill rucksacks full of them. 8 rucksacks. Talking 20, 30, 40,000 a bag. 207 bags and containers of valuables, artwork including paintings, and jewellery. So that's just miscellaneous stuff. 3,362 bags of gold coins, all stamped with the Reichsimperium eagle. All of them. So they can't be used, they've got to be melted down again. 55 crates of gold bullion, and 8,307 solid gold bars. Like that. 8,307 of them.
See, that would be a more impressive picture when they found all that than that.
It's a lot of gold. That's a lot of gold. The total value of the loot that was found in the mine is estimated to be about $517 million in 1945. Adjusted for inflation, that's $7.25 billion today in one place. It's believed to be the single most valuable collection of Nazi plunder ever recovered.
And almost by luck, really, by chance. I mean, I suppose they would have found it eventually. But
yeah, but, you know, that's the kind of information I don't know, would I have kept that to myself? Probably not. Someone would have gone in there eventually, wouldn't they? You know, curious farmer or...
What do you think? Maybe the woman could have kept it to herself and then gone
she
back.
knew about it. She was so honest. If she didn't go in there and take a gold bar or something for herself, my country's been raped by the Nazis, I'm just going to secure my future with this gold bar. Hide it away. See, it's portable, hide it away.
It's not that horrible.
Now, remember that they estimate the total amount stolen was 26 billion adjusted. So that's nearly a quarter in one place.
Oh.
Unbelievable. So, we've heard an example of how they got it out. We've heard an example of what they might have found. We're now going to talk about the legend of the gold train.
What we're here for, really. I wonder when that was going to crop up.
The big one. Allegedly, a train laden with gold bars and bullion, along with paintings and various other treasures, left Breslau, bound for Project Reuser in the Au Mountains, around January of 1945.
I wonder when the train was going to crop up in the episode. I know it has, hasn't it?
Kind
it
of.
has.
A train has cropped up. You know, this is another one. It's a special train. It's a phantom train. It was to be buried in a warren of tunnels and mines for retrieval later after the war. It's believed that this was an attempt to evacuate a large cache of loot from the area ahead of the Allies' advance. Makes sense. Do we keep this gold, try and hide it, or do we let the Allies take the lot. All that effort stealing it.
Try and conceal it. You probably would, wouldn't you?
Yeah. So yet another person thinking, oh, I think I'll just
cash in
a bit, you know.
You probably would though, wouldn't you?
Probably would. I mean, you know, morally speaking, I feel terrible for the people, but that's a train loaded with gold. I'll probably give most of it back. Just keep a little bit.
Don't give any of it back.
So the train is supposed to have carried the following inventory: 300 tons of gold bars. 300 tons of gold bars.
That's a lot, isn't it? That you need a train for that, don't you? Definitely.
Yeah, you can't UPS that. You're gonna need.
Well, you could, but it'd be a UPS train.
A large quantity of jewels and brilliants.
Brilliance.
Diamonds, gemstones, settings. That's what they called them. I had to look it up.
That's what they used to call jewellery.
You ever heard that before?
Well, I've looked at somebody's ring and they said, "Do you like it?" And I said, "Yes, brilliant." But I didn't assume they thought that I meant that it was what you're talking about now.
They call it weapons caches. Self-explanatory. If you're going to leave a contingent of guards behind to guard it, they're going to need some serious guns.
You don't want to arm up.
Yeah. Masterpieces of artwork.
Masterpieces of artwork.
A bit questionable though to leave boxes of paintings in a train that they're then going to bury.
They wouldn't be in boxes, would they? They'd be in those frames, and then they cover them in certain types of fabric and stash them in crates. And I wasn't there.
In 2015, the train gained worldwide media exposure as it was claimed to have been located by two treasure hunters. They said that the train had been buried close to kilometre 65 of the low gauge line, leading towards the site of the Project Riser underground complexes. Having provided their evidence in the form of ground-penetrating radar imagery, they began a dig at the site with the assistance of the Polish military. After 7 days of digging, and with an expenditure nearly at $131,000, the team found nothing but ice formations. Now, you might remember that. It was on the front page of all the shitty newspapers.
Oh, don't even get me started on this.
What do they know? I mean,
the red tops.
all the newspapers reported it. It was on the television, on the news. And these guys claimed to have found this train by using ground-penetrating radar.
That's not really... They're not really treasure hunters then, are they, if they're using a laptop?
It's not very romantic, is it? In the Owl Mountains near Waldbrigge, there are different complexes that have been named. They've got Polish names now. I'm not even going to try.
No, don't.
I'm not even going to try to pronounce them. And these places are all part of what's called Project Riser, built with slave labour, which we've heard about before.
Yeah, we've heard about Project Riser already.
A few times, yeah.
I remember.
And this is in the Owl Mountains, and they dug all these tunnels out using slave labour. What was that?
An owl?
That was not a f***ing owl. They began digging at a site with the assistance of the Polish military. It was a big hoo-ha. They had to cordon it off.
Mm-hmm.
They had to keep civilians away. There were actually two digs. These two guys, these treasure hunters, they were allowed to conduct the first survey, and there was a non-penetrative dig. So they did a non-invasive dig, and then there was another expedition that went over with the assistance of the Polish government. They tried to claim a 10% finder's fee.
I'd want it all if I found it. 10%?
It's technically the property of whoever...
Well, yeah, to be fair, maybe not that. But if it was just random gold, and don't tell anyone about it to start off with.
Pretty difficult to walk into Nationwide with gold bars that have got the bloody swastika stamped in.
I wouldn't do that, would I?
Cash these in, please.
Sell them on the dark web.
Put that in my current account. On the dark web. Right. You probably could get away with that.
Of course you could.
Either that or just melt it down.
You can sell your kidney on the dark web. I'm surfing that all the time. So I got this eye infection. It's not funny.
What actually happened?
It's an infection.
You didn't get beaten up at work?
No. It's an infection. Do you want it?
No. This is brilliant. After 7 days of digging and with an expenditure of nearly $131,000, they found nothing. Soddo. Actually, they did find something. They found a big ice formation. And that's what was showing up on their radar.
That's not finding something though, is it?
No. There is more I can tell you. So, ultimately, what happened?
It's like an encore.
Okay, so I'll read you a few bits out that you may find interesting. You may not. The Swiss National Bank was something I was going to discuss. There was a group called the Bergier Commission that was tasked with investigating the role of the Swiss National Bank in laundering the gold.
Now the Swiss were neutral.
They were neutral. They were the only country in Europe that managed to remain neutral.
It always baffled me that. They're like smack there.
They were a financial might. $316 million of gold was deposited into the Swiss National Bank. Approximately 100 tons of that was looted gold. That's 316 million then. Only 4 tons of those 100 was ever returned. So of the 316 million, 1945, only 12.6 million was returned. So according to the Bergier Commission that we mentioned earlier, 77% of gold arrangements were made during the war through the Swiss National Bank or their subsidiaries. Gold is known to have been exchanged for Swiss francs, and then the Swiss would then allow those francs to be used to purchase arms to fund the war effort. So a lot of it was...
The Swiss, not very neutral, is it?
Well, the Swiss claimed a few things. First of all, lack of knowledge of origin. Even though they continued to purchase gold right up until May 1945. So that's bullshit. The right of seizure. So during the war, at the time, the Hague Conventions stated that only state property, not privately owned or banked assets, are the right of seizure of the invading force. The vast majority of what was stolen was banked or privately owned gold, jewellery, brilliance.
All's fair in love and war.
Not according to the Hague Convention. And also the need to maintain neutrality. They were worried that the Germans would just invade and take their reserves, so they decided to collaborate. Allegedly. The total estimate of looted gold value, 26 billion, from all sources.
Tomato and barbecue.
Scraping the barrel tonight. Some of the gold ended up in the personal possession. I say some of the gold. Some of the loot. Some of the loot ended up in the personal possession of military servicemen, mainly US servicemen. The restitution policy at the time that was in place was obviously to return cultural property to its country of origin. That didn't really happen because of all the confusion and mayhem at the end of the war, trying to sort out Germany.
It must have happened a bit though.
Some did find its way back, which we'll go into. A large portion of the assets ended up in a military government warehouse in Salzburg, which we talked about earlier. Most of that was from the train they found in southern Austria. International restitution arrangements were made under what's called the Marshall Act. That was put in place shortly after the end of the war to try to either recompense or to return to countries of origin the artwork, etc., the gold, the loot that was stolen. A lot of the miscellaneous loot was sold through army exchange stores in 1946 to needy or desperate people that had been displaced by the war.
So they just gave it away, some of it, to the refugees and the people that have been displaced and just families destroyed by war.
Yeah, a lot of the displaced people, a lot of what they called needy persons, which was synonymous with Jewish at that point, to be honest, because they were by far and away the most affected ethnic group.
Well, yeah.
A lot was deposited in financial institutions, probably to boost the economies of the countries that had been trashed by the war. A huge amount of the bullion was known to have gone to the Reichsbank, which at the time was in Dresden. We all know what happened to Dresden. Just like that.
In the closing days of the Second World War, it is generally safe to assume that gold caches and loot would have been hidden by Nazis all over Europe, while a proportion of this was recovered. If not returned to its rightful owners, large quantities of this were never in fact found. The fate of this gold, however, overshadows what the true tragedy of the war really was. That economies were left crippled, countries were left utterly plundered, and its citizens left penniless in the wake of the Nazi war machine. This, ultimately, is the true sad legacy of the Nazi gold.
So yeah, that's the tale of the Nazi gold.
Probably put our picture up again.
Where do you put
Somewhere.
that?
I
We
don't
are
know,
running out of space.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, what about here above my head? Fabulous.
Could put it there.
It's counterproductive. So that's that. Stole everything they could and then hid it, lost it, sold it. You know, just collapsed the economies of 7 or 8 different countries at the same time.
Bastards.